Boom! According to that, I am live. Welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. My name is Senkaku Islands. I'm here every week at around this time, always going for 10:30. I got a little bit sucked into making a new track that on GarageBand. I wasn't using the keyboard. Well, I'd already made some of the loops with the keyboard, which I might pull out later on. There's not a lot of topics to talk about tonight. I can tell you, honestly, there's not much news other than the coronavirus stuff, and other than today's status, there's no point telling you what the numbers were each day this week. So of course I can talk about that, but yes, tonight is the perfect night if you've got topics that you would like me to talk about. Perfect, hit me with them, because not a lot going on. Excellent to see again. I didn't set this up early in advance, so as usual I very much appreciate the people who caught the notification and are coming in early. I see Quint Rankin, good to see you. Sussex Patrick, not a name that I recognize, awesome to have you there in the comments. Andrea Mulboy, great to see you, very late there. Very quiet. What does that mean? Does that mean that it's very quiet in terms of news, or is my now you're making me paranoid about my sound? The sound looks okay over here. I hope that is okay. Chris Jack, excellent to see you. Yes, thank you everyone for joining. So remember, as always, if you've got a question for me or something that you'd like me to discuss, just put in an @Kiko-Simon and it will come, it'll flash orange basically beside me over here. I'm going to pull, ooh, you know what, that's dangerous, pulling the microphone closer, because it could bump into other things like I just did, which wasn't intentional, but yes, anyway, hopefully that will help with the sound and whatnot, and it's great to see so many people there in the comments. 503, Tokyo 503, good to see you. And yeah, awesome to see everybody. I'm not going to play with the settings. Yes, remember, when you come in and join, if you're joining, I love it when people just say hello, just to let me know that they're here. Tech Art too, awesome to see you. I hope all is well in your corner of the world. Indeed, interesting in Melbourne, where Andrea Moboy is, just mentioning that 75 cases there linked to a meat processing facility. I've heard that that's been a big problem in the US as well. In fact, so much so that they're having trouble actually maintaining meat supply because there have been so many meat packing facilities that have had spreads. So yeah, that's a concern. Yes, anyway, good to see everybody. I guess I will just jump straight into the topics. I might have some time for a tune or something at the end. Situation today, I guess, is the right place to start. I start from the start of the week in terms of the sequence of topics here. But yeah, at the moment, the total today was like 27, I think, in Tokyo. So the numbers have come down a lot. And although when the numbers were like down in double digits, like 39 and 37, and we're all thinking that, well, this is just because of Golden Week, and when it catches up, when they get the backlog of new cases from Golden Week, that there's going to be this huge hit of 200 or whatever, the backlog will come through. But that doesn't seem to have happened, and now it's been, Golden Week was basically this last week, where we had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off in Japan. And I don't know if any of you in Japan did anything, but most people I know didn't do anything, and I think that's what most people did. They stayed home as they're supposed to. They didn't go and do stupid things like going to the beach or visiting other prefectures or whatever and risking spreading or catching. And it seems, by and large, people in Japan, although there hasn't been a lockdown, the goal of reducing movement by about 80%. They haven't quite reached 80%, but around Tokyo they've achieved 67 to 70% around most stations. Of course, there's been more busy around suburban stations where people live, but by and large, the requests to reduce movement without having a full lockdown seem to be working. The number today is the lowest it's been in ages, and actually now we've had 8 days in a row of less than 100 people in Tokyo. So. Certainly not out of the woods. In fact, the big risk now is that people start to feel relaxed, and they'll start doing things which will increase risk. And of course, the second wave is a big discussion of conversation at the moment, but certainly the trend here is positive. Also, in terms of the current situation with the state of emergency, at the very start, I think I mentioned on the show last week, they have extended the nationwide state of emergency, which, remember, was originally only for 7 prefectures, and then it got extended to 13 prefectures, and then everybody wanted it, and so they extended it to all prefectures. But remember, even though it's extending to all prefectures, some prefectures like Iwate, for example, don't have any cases right now. And although the Prime Minister extended the state of emergency for all prefectures until May 31st, until the end of the month, some prefectures have already had like basically no cases for so long that it looks like certainly many prefectures outside of the core 13 that still have a lot of cases could fully have social distancing restrictions lifted within May. Tokyo, whatever happens, Tokyo is going to be the last. We have the most cases. We still have the most daily cases. It's probably foreseeable it will go into June here at least, and it seems like there'll be some sort of restrictions probably on for a while. But certainly if the current trend continues, we could be really looking at some sort of easing anyway at the end of the month. So positive news here, just like I'm hearing in Australia. I was talking to my mum in Brisbane today for Mother's Day. Oh, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers who are watching. Also good to see more people coming in. I see we've got the French-Canadian philosopher. Hi from Quebec City, 9:40 a.m. Great to have you watching. Good to have you along. Remember, as I tell everybody, drop me comments, drop me questions. It gives me more to talk about. And you just have to @ Markiko Simon, and I will notice it. It will flash orange. Kang and Kodos, Sergeant Bilko, Wing Star. Lots of people coming in. Odie Jr., boom, good morning. Good to see you. J Mac, we've got Jack. It's good to see some new names as well. So the J Vlog, salutations, good to see you. But yeah, so as I was saying, although right now we are currently still going through the end of May with social distancing, there is no lockdown, and the signs are good. The numbers are coming down with all the caveats that, of course, while Japan is taking a more restricted approach to testing, only really serious cases, so the numbers don't necessarily reflect the actual number of cases. It certainly wouldn't reflect light or asymptomatic cases. But what we do know about Japan is that there have been very few people dying, and that they've been consistently applying this testing criteria, which means that unless the virus itself is getting weaker, and so the same number of people or more people are still getting it, but just serious cases are declining, assuming that the disease is more or less consistent in how it affects people, yeah, we're going from 200 serious cases a day to 20 serious cases a day. So that's a good thing. The gating criteria has been high. The government has increased the testing capacity, but they had a high gating criteria, which meant that in spite of the fact they increased the testing capacity, the same number of tests were still being done, only about 300, 400 per day. A lot of people are critical of that, but this is based on applying the same criteria. So, the ideas of there being testing capacity issues have been more or less overcome, and the government sort of responding to criticism that Japan is one of the lowest testing developed countries. They are looking this week, I think, to reduce the testing criteria, like you don't need to have had a fever for 4 days to qualify for a test anymore. Things like that. So that will improve. The other thing that the government is starting to look at is antibody resistance testing, which I've seen the this week tonight covering of that those tests, there are reliable tests and unreliable tests. This is why the Japanese government's the Ministry of Health is actually researching exactly which tests it's going to use and ensure that they're reliable first, because there are reliability issues with those tests. What was interesting is that whereas in places like California, I think, where they did a random population sampling, they did this in Austria as well, to see who had developed antibodies indicating that they may have had COVID-19. In those places, they had pretty 10-20% of population having them. They did the same exercise in Kobe, which is one of the harder hit cities in Japan, and they found 3% of people randomly sampled 3,000 people had antibodies, which implied, at least from this one very isolated, limited test, that we really haven't had it as seriously in Japan. However, the government actually wants to, now that more tests are available, and we seem to be going past the peak of at least the first wave, the government is now looking to try to assess actually how widespread this disease is. And that will inform how much we can ease restrictions. So a good trend. I was about to start to say before, obviously things are easing in New Zealand and Australia, which have had lockdowns, and reducing those. Queensland, where my mum is from, they basically lifted the lockdown entirely last week. So I'm hearing that shopping malls are packed, beaches are packed, no one's wearing masks. which is kind of alarming. We don't have a lockdown, but everyone here wears masks. I've been jogging wearing a mask. It's kind of sucks, but it's been nice to be able to run again. You might remember I mentioned a few weeks ago that I screwed 2 months ago. I screwed my Achilles, and it really took 2 months to get before I could really jog at all on it. But it is better. I've been for a couple of runs, slow runs, been really careful with it. But it's actually nice to be able to run again. And yeah, the leg's holding up fine. So this is part of one of the things I'm going to talk about. How obviously a lot of people feeling cooped up doing exercise. But yeah, it looks like not just here. Still obviously terrible in America. And still bad in Europe. Actually, what I'm hearing out of UK is that it seems terrible there. But Tokyo, as things go, it isn't a lockdown. It's voluntary social distancing, but it has substantively people. Less people are going into work. People are avoiding public transportation, and it looks like what in spite of the government contribution being not many tests and 2 masks. And the Japanese population really not finding the national government has done a very good job in public opinion's view. The governors of Osaka and Tokyo have gotten a lot of positive reviews on this. But yeah, in spite of that, it looks like the people of Japan just seem to have actually done the necessary things on their own without the need for a lockdown, which is nice, because this is kind of the problem, I guess, in Australia. Is when you only get this cooperation through real harsh coercion, through police enforcing lockdowns, when you take it away, people go back to being idiots as soon as the idea of instilling self-driven, when you have externally driven social responsibility, I guess that's the risk, that when you take away that coercion, that people jump out again. But there again, of course, Japan, like every country, they have people, and there's a certain population of the percentage of the population that are idiots, and they ignore these things. And I'm going to talk a bit about in the show how that gets regulated in Japan. They don't regulate here with fines or tracing, but the Japanese public is pretty harsh on how they socially enforce these things. Olivia D, good to see you there in the comments. Also good to see Mr. Cordy Chap. Welcome in. 94 kilometers exclamation point says Mr. Cordy Chap. I have no idea what that means because I just saw that comment as the very newest one. Tokyo 503. Japanese people do what they're told in a crisis. Yeah, the idea that Japan is a completely obedient society, I think that I've heard people say this when I've been talking with people overseas. It's not true at all. There are a lot of people flouting all of the rules and so on, but I think there's a higher sense of social, and when I say social responsibility, it's true that in the US and Australia and New Zealand, people have a higher sense of contributing to charity and doing work for other people, like selfless sort of, good works. But in terms of general, just a feeling of acting responsibly, yeah, Japanese people, I think there is a high sense of that. I don't think it's actually obedience or subservience. That people are not wearing masks because Abe is telling them to do so. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and they realize that it's a responsibility. That's my take on it. But yes, so Andrea Moba said 300,000 people tested in the last week in Australia. More test kits were ordered to test the majority of the population. So is that what they're doing in Australia now? They're just testing everybody regardless of whether they have the disease or not. Just trying to, which makes sense, I guess, when you get to that exit point, trying to figure out who has it and who doesn't. Or is that antibody tests, or is that actually PCR tests? God, I hate the fact that we actually know all this language now as well, which we didn't know a couple of months ago. But UK, Tokyo 503, pretty tough. Kangen Kodos, you walking 94 kilometers playing Pokemon Go with daughter last week. That's pretty intense. I hope you caught them all. Although if you catch them all, I guess the game would end. There wouldn't be much of a point to that. So anyway, first story, as I just mentioned, the state of emergency has been extended, but that doesn't mean that there is like a lockdown or anything like that. The situation here is actually still entirely voluntary social distancing, as it's been from the beginning. So it's kind of weird. Japan has been doing these voluntary lockdowns from before, like when a lot of other countries were doing these sort of lockdown measures that we've seen, like in Australia. Japan's been doing this for longer, but less coercively, but still kind of coercively. It's a bit weird. Heko must have live chat on top comment, not live. I don't know. At the moment, I'm not looking at the screen, to tell you the truth. I'm looking at the actual chat that I'm seeing. So if there's a lag on the chat, that's probably it. But yes, indeed. The NRL doesn't know what it's doing. Well, what's new? So yes, anyway, state of emergency extended. What else have we got? I heard so many people saying, do not watch Planet of the Humans. And it's about renewable energy and a critique of that, which that used to be my shtick. I used to do that for a job. I used to do policy consulting on renewable energy. So I was kind of like curious to watch it just because so many, I like, when I say I like Michael Moore, I think what I really liked about Michael Moore was I liked TV Nation, which is like back in the early 1990s, I think, and they only made like 8 episodes of it, and it was awesome, and you can still find it on YouTube, and it's worth looking at that. I've kind of found he gets a little bit polemic-y with old age. My take on Planet of the Humans, having watched it, is it's funny. I've read a Mike Moore book, Dude, What Happened to My Country, or something like that, where he was kind of like, it was kind of a tirade against George W. Bush at the time and the Iraq War and whatnot. But when the most vitriol that Moore has, and I kind of understand this, wasn't for Republicans that he opposes. It was for Democrats that he disagrees with. Like, it's funny, he hates sellout Democrats more than Republicans. He actually put it that, at least you know what to expect with Republicans. It's always disappointing when to be let down by Democrats that you have expectations for. And this is kind of where he is. He's obviously very far left on the spectrum, and we've had Clinton and Gore, centrist Democrats, who for him have sold out their original values. And what was interesting about this Planet of the Humans documentary is that this is basically a traditionalist environmentalist, like in the old chaining yourself to a tree. Gaia theory, the world is a living being, Malthusianism, which is it's basically the construct that underpins a lot of traditional environmentalism, which is that the world is finite. There is finite things in this world, and when you have an exponentially growing population and an economic production and consumerism growing exponentially, at some point this is going to trigger collapses of resources, and that fear of overpopulation and overconsumption through economic production is something that was born in the late 18th century, I think it was, during the start of the Industrial Revolution, when people saw overpopulated parts of the UK and the poverty that would result from overpopulation, land holdings not being passed down, and realizing you spread this out to the whole globe, the globe is going to run out of food, and humanity and the world will end. It's an apocalyptic theory that the world will end because there'll be too many people making too many things. Essentially, this is what a lot of the greenies from the post-war period, actually from the pre-war period as well, but again, it can be sensitive to get into that. But certainly post-war greenies are based on this idea that, the world is limited, and so people should prioritize sustainability, basically making things that we have last and replacing what we take. And this is kind of the fundamental underpinning of the ideas and the excitement, actually, around things like renewable energy, this idea that it's all sustainable and renewable. Truth is that, there are a lot of limitations with the technology. It was my job to go and figure out what the limitations were and what reasonable policies were, because, the promise of renewable energy, unlimited, renewable, eco-friendly energy, well, you just say, well, why don't we just have 100% solar or 100% wind? And the truth is it doesn't work quite that way, unfortunately. There are limits to the technology, clouds, there's intermittency, there are solutions involving storage. Including, they talked a lot about batteries. They didn't talk about pumped hydro wells, which are actually the traditional mechanical batteries, which work way better actually still than batteries. But they pointed out that the truth that you can't have wind power without thermal, which can be burning fossil fuels or burning biomass or whatever, to offset. You need an engine like a car engine going in the background to offset the instability caused by fluctuations in renewable energy. And basically he just points out these issues, and these are not fatal issues. It still is better to have a whole bunch of wind and solar and hydro and everything, than it is to not have any at all. And the technology around it is always improving. And a lot of critiques of this documentary, that the reason that people say some people don't say don't watch it, fundamentally a lot of the critiques are sort of like, well, you can't handle this information. If people watch this, they'll think that renewables are bad and it'll set us backwards when, there are issues, but only focusing on the issues will give people the wrong idea, so don't watch it. That's a stupid and patronizing way to critique this. The best criticism is that most of the facts are 10 years old. I know that they're 10 years old because they all ring true to me, and my information is 10 years old. So, and of course you expect this stuff to progress. Also didn't mention, if you're really concerned about things like climate change, you can't have that without nuclear power. And that is what, you can't have a policy to address climate change, basically, or fossil-based, energy. Energy production is still fundamentally the number one cause of human-based emissions. And you're not going to be able to do it all with windmills. You got to use nuclear power. You have to use every non-fossil fuel-based energy source available, including the big ones. Even if if you come from backgrounds of not liking that sort of thing. So essentially, what he didn't like was that now you have, again, including Mike Gore himself, who obviously Michael Moore hates. You have a lot of very capitalist, hey, we can make lots of money and save the environment at the same time, and we don't have to change, we don't have to have sustainable lifestyles, we can enjoy capitalist, never-ending growth. There's a lot of people in the environmental lobby now who advocate for renewables, who do it in a very business-friendly way, and why not get some investment? And this was part of what my work was in. But sure, as a traditionalist environmentalist who isn't sure that capitalism, the fundamentals, the Malthusianism, people who believe in this idea that sooner or later we're going to use up the whole planet, which is a kind of oversimplified way of looking at things, and often is linked to other things like eugenics, population, and again, these are the things which actually motivate and underpin the very basics of traditional conservationism. So look, he's just giving the equivalent of a far-left critique of centrist Democrats that Michael Moore does. He does of environmentalists, and I know people are sensitive to it, but I don't think there's nothing in it that I think is dangerous information. So long as you should be responsible to be informed about the whole thing. It was an okay documentary. The criticisms I thought were fair. They didn't really offset, and the information was a bit out of date. They didn't really paint the full picture, but it was interesting. So that was something I watched. A few comments there, by the way. So Kangen Kodos talking about Pokemon Go. I'm reading further up the chain. Catching up comments. Andrea Morba, everyone can get tested, drive-through or test at shopping centre car parks. So I wonder what happens with that. So people, even like people who don't think they've had it, might take it just to be safe. Well, yeah. The J-Vlog, wait, I did renewable energy policy. Yes, okay, why does Japan not have more geothermal? Easy, the same reason it doesn't have more wind or more solar. It's because Japan has 8 incompatible separate power grids. When they started the first power generators in Japan in the Meiji period, like the very first one, I can't remember which had which, but basically the very first 2 grids in Japan. The one in Tokyo was based, let's say for argument's sake, it was a Westinghouse generator from the United States, which was 110 volt but ran on 60 hertz. And Osaka got its first generator from Germany or somewhere that was also 110 volts but ran on 50 hertz, i.e. the grids are not compatible. And in those days, when you only had one generator doing some streetlights in Tokyo and some streetlights in Osaka, nobody imagined that these grids would spread across the whole country, and they would add more generators and have isolated geographically in a country the same size as California. The United States is able to install a lot of renewables all over the place because you can have geothermal in Yellowstone Park, and people in Florida can use that power, and in the whole grid. The whole idea is that you can't have more than 5% unstable sources of generation on a power grid. But the bigger the power grid is, then the more that you have to suck up, basically the bigger that 5% can be, which is why you can have people in Florida using geothermal from Yellowstone. In Japan, people can only consume power that's generated and connected to the grid that they're on. And, unfortunately, all the great wind in Hokkaido is connected to the power grid in Hokkaido, not to the one in Tokyo. All the geothermal in Kyushu is on the Kyushu power grid, which is not connected to Honshu. They do have transfer stations. They do have some limited ability to transfer power, but they're incompatible, which is why maybe you don't know this. If you buy a hairdryer in Osaka, you can't use it in Tokyo. They both work. They both plug into 110 volts. but either they catch fire or they're underpowered and they won't dry your hair. Obviously, I fixed that problem. But for people who need hair dryers, there's actually a thing that these things used to cause fires, and there'd be like warning stickers back in the day. I think now they actually have standards in Japan that mean that appliances will work. They have double insulation, specifically because the power grids are incompatible. And that is why Japan has tons of fantastic geothermal, but it's isolated from they're on small grids, and they're not connected to the grids where they could be used more. That's the fundamental problem. That's why they can't expand it more. More fundamentally, Japan has a ton of nuclear and a ton of fossil fuel, which is cheap, natural gas powered and thermal plants. They also have a ton of hydro. They have a lot of dams and so on. So in terms of big base load capacity, Japan has a lot of stuff. Geothermal, by the way, New Zealand has as well, and a lot of hydro. New Zealand and Japan are very similar, like in this regard. Just Japan is so much more, so much bigger economy. But yeah, Japan, if they could fix the grid, if they could unify all 8 grids, which fundamentally is a project equivalent to rebuilding all the roads in the country or rebuilding all the plumbing in the country. It's not very sexy and it's really hard to do, but you can't fix the big problems until you fix the grid. And the grid is just a result of history, that people just built it ad hoc and they never really thought at the time that they started out about having common standards. And the result is that Japan just has these crazy small grids. Sorry, I can talk about this all day, but that's why. And it's frustrating, but this is why. If you want more renewables in Japan, you don't. What you really want is not more windmills. You want to rebuild the grid from scratch, which is a huge and unsexy task, but it needs to be done. Knar has a message retracted. I'm sorry you retracted, but there's someone down there in Quebec still rising. So yeah, fun stuff indeed. Sorry, I'm catching up comments from before. But Andrea Morboy, they still sell West Gold milk, powdered milk in your local Woolies. Well, that's a good thing. Peter Alexandra, good, but COVID-10 fake globalist control tool agenda. Thank you, Peter Alexander. Hope that tinfoil hat is comfortable. And indeed, Operation Lockstep, yes indeed. Uranus has spies everywhere. Who else we got? Quint Rankid. Do appliance manufacturers make equipment able to adapt to those? So yes, there are things. Again, another part of my life is working with electronic safety standards lately. In Japan, I became unintentionally. One thing about Japan is that devices that you import into Japan to meet Japanese PSE standards, to get that little PSE sticker, need to be double insulated. They need to actually have more. They actually have higher standards than the global standards, which is annoying if you want to import something that's made without Japan being in mind. Is quite often appliances are not compatible with Japan because they have to have these fireproof plugs, but it's because you have grids with completely different frequencies. So yeah. Quint Rankid, what do long-range RRs like the Shinkansen do? Do they have their own generation systems? I don't know. I assume that for systems like the Shinkansen, remember there are different track systems, but yeah, it's a good question. Like the Tokaido Shinkansen that goes from Tokyo to Osaka, which does cross a grid boundary, I guess they have their own transform. Well, obviously they draw power from the tracks, and obviously they have transformers and whatever. So JR probably controls the feed. Somewhere in between, they're not simply connecting the power lines in Osaka and Tokyo at the same time to the Shinkansen tracks. I assume that they're transforming the power supply, but who knows? I'm not an expert at that particular thing. Now this is funny. Why do I have this? I don't remember adding this. Why did I add this? Oh yeah. This is so now Japan is looking seriously at changing the school year, which as a dad, this is an interesting thing. One interesting problem though, the logistics problems coming up. One is that if you delay the school year until September, and remembering that most in Tokyo, most schools the classes are full. Each year you'll have 6 classes of 40 kids, and they're only allowed to have like 35, but generally on an exception basis they can have up to 40. Problem is that if you hold back the start of the school year for 5 months to get to September to be in sync with most of the world, India, Europe, America all have school years that start in September. You're going to have 5 months worth of extra birthdays and kids who have been held back waiting, and which means that those new classes for first grade are going to be 40% bigger. So what's that? A class of 40 kids. That's going to mean nearly 60 kids. So yeah, there are problems which people are trying to figure out. It is a good opportunity to get into sync with most of the world. Of course, where I grew up in New Zealand and Australia, the school year follows the calendar year. But again, the advantage of being in sync with India, Europe, and America is that you can have things like school exchanges. You can take a year off and go and study in universities. But in Japan, people have to take 2 years off to be able to go and do a year in the US. So yeah, it's there are problems like that which people are starting to figure out. Early in the week, there was interesting that one of the chief medical advisors to the government actually went through the 6 reasons that Japan has not been doing more testing. This has been a key point of criticism, of course. Yeah, I mean, part of it was the government was just blaming the health bureaus in every local area for basically, not realizing that they could do more. But yeah, first of all, they're saying that the burden on the local health bureaus that administer the tests has been too great until now, and they haven't had enough support. The second point here, 入院先確保するために仕組み十分機能してない. So the idea of the link of between the testing centers and hospitalization and available hospitals and beds was not sufficiently set up. This is like May that we're just acknowledging that we had these problems that should have been addressed like back in February. 超衛生研究室限られたリソースの中、通常の検査業務の並行して実施する必要がある。All the existing the research centers that do these tests have to also, on top of doing these tests, maintain their regular day-to-day work. Like, remember, these testing centers are not just there for testing COVID-19. They test for cancer, they test for diabetes. They're doing all kinds of different tests, and they have to maintain those regular operations that they also have. Yeah, so 作用者および検査者マスク予防。Generally, there's been a shortage of personal protective equipment for people who work in testing centers and hospitals looking after these people, and that's put a strain on the ability to process people. 保険適用後、一般の練習を契約すればがなければ検査。So there's also a problem that even after finding out that in order to be able to process, for example, the insurance claims relating to the test, they have to have actual contracts in place with the prefectural governments, and so they haven't been able to expand that because of the time taken to get these contracts in place. That's stupid. 民間検査会社を運ぶための業種輸送機材など必要だった。And yeah, and in terms of trying to the necessary in order for private institutions to become certified and have the means for transferring and delivering the tests and whatnot, that infrastructure and authorization infrastructure wasn't there. So essentially, too much bureaucracy. Bureaucracy being the cause of bureaucracy being unable to get these tests done. I really hope that the post-mortem on this is pretty intense. I mean, remember, Japan doesn't have a CDC of any form. And this is partly what's been going on with all of this and why it's sort of been so bad. The J-Vlog. Our supermarkets are out of heavy cream and wheat, getting pissed off. I hope you're not getting pissed off at Hiko Simon. I hope you're just getting pissed off and telling me that that's happening. With that Mark Hiko Simon there, yes. Well, this is again, you are going to set me off here. The milk boards... There's been a lot of farms and the dairy board have a steady supply to schools where they directly supply from farm to school, and because they're not connected to supermarkets and they're not connected to other means of distribution, what's happened is that now there's been an oversupply of milk that was intended for schools that's not being consumed, as well as there's been in the news a lot that a lot of these farms that supply like school cafeterias, they can't sell, they're just local farms in rural areas, so they try, they can't sell it locally, and they don't have means of distribution to anywhere else. I mean, this is food that could be going to help people who, need, like food kitchens and so on, people who, there are people who need, food support, and these farms are just simply throwing it and composting all of this stuff which isn't getting sent to schools or government cafeterias or whatever because they're shut down. But there's been no attempt to cover that. And again, there's been an overproduction of milk. And basically the Ministry of Agriculture just has done advertisements begging people to drink more milk, please, because we made too much. As you know, just make more butter. And, you know, the whole situation, of course, as usual, being ridiculous, but I'll try not to explode. It is a sensitive topic, and stop it. Next topic. Staying home but not in shape. So this is a problem, of course. And now, you know, and people running is controversial. There was a thing on the news tonight in Japan that's just sort of giving advice, because half of the problem is that it's, you know, people don't run or they do less, and the other half of the problem is that when they do, the busybody culture of Japan, there's people who immediately say, oh, that doesn't look like it's a good idea, people running, you know. And so now there are guidelines on the news like, you know, don't run before and after people, because, you know, if you're downwind from people sweating, they emit germs if they're not wearing a mask. I mean, they'll still emit germs with the mask, but less. So one, they say absolutely run with the mask. Two, run if you're running behind someone, keep 10 meters behind someone, and stay 1.5 meters away from someone if you're running beside them. But other than that, you can run, but do not run without a mask, even if you feel tough. They talked about just jog, just go on a smiley pace, you know. I've been starting to get back into that myself, but I'm certainly, while I've succeeded in being able to control my diet a little bit, I've been snacking a lot less. I'm down to 79.8 kilograms today, although I made pizza tonight, so it's probably going to be over 80 again tomorrow. I would love to get down to my target weight for my height of 74. I'm never going to get near that, but if I can get comfortably into the 70s, that'd be good. I must admit, I've been trying really hard, and I've gotten down to 80, which is like off the start of the year, 7 kilos less, but I don't know that I'm going to, even trying as hard as I can, I don't think I can get down much below 80. But yeah, I'm not in good shape. I've stopped doing Muay Thai. I've stopped exercising. That's the thing I'm most looking forward to, actually, is getting back to being able to exercise at my gym. But I do enjoy running. I used to run at high school. I wasn't very fast, but I like running. And doing that again, my legs, just after I did my first proper run for a while, I did a kind of a slow run, and then I did a proper run. And my legs just felt like I'd had baseball bats all over them, but my Achilles held up. So yeah, I've been doing that a little bit more, and I'm enjoying that. But it's a hard thing to do, especially when you live in Japan in apartments, and you can't make you can't jump up and down or even walk heavily. You know, you have to be. I had to learn how to walk differently, so that was a thing. Just looking at the comments, Mr. Korichev, Hiko should run for Prime Minister of Japan and fix the entire dairy situation of the Dairy First Party. Damn straight. Thank you, the J-Vlog. No, it's okay. Hey, Tainaka, good to see you, man. What else we got here? Japan's business lobby is to suggest a 4-day work week. And this is kind of interesting, because you might recall a few months ago that when Microsoft in Japan tried a 4-day work week, 4-day work week, but with longer hours. So you're still working, you know, on an 8-day, 5-day, or 8 hours a day, 5-day work week, 40 hours. They were simply doing those 10-hour days instead of 8-hour days. So you're still working the same number of hours, but you'd have 3-day weekends and 4 days of work. And they found, well, honestly, productivity improvements that I found were actually hard to believe. But yeah, what they came up with was workers were happier and more work was actually getting done. And there is this idea that with increasing automation in the economy, when you talk about things like universal basic income, and the need, basically, as we are becoming more productive and we're increasing our ability to be productive while physically doing less, there's a lot of economists, I mean, Jerry Yang or whatever, talking about how, the future economy will need people having more leisure time to be able to spend money, to be able to, actually consume based on the production that we're doing. Again, the guy who made that documentary, that environmental documentary earlier, probably would be throwing up, hearing the idea. But, it's a good idea that there should be a lifestyle dividend from the improvements in automation. And it's kind of tied up with all of that. The fact that the business lobby in Japan is kind of noticing that, it actually means that people have more time to go out and buy stuff that companies are making. And you can still get people to work just as well, in fact, be more productive on 4 days. So, yeah. Abel, good to see you, man. Also, SBYLP1. Your weight gained a lot. I've heard a lot of people have been gaining weight. I don't know. Like I said, I've just been gaming it. I weigh myself every morning. I track my sleep. I enjoy making games out of it, and also, in Japan, one thing about Japan is that they really hassle you about your weight, like on your health checks and stuff like that. They don't sugarcoat it and say that, we know that you're beautiful on the inside, but, maybe you could consider healthier eating habits. They don't dress it up. They say that you're too fat and you need to be checked into a hospital if you stay at 85 kilograms, which is like, I'm 6'1". Oh, I'm just about the skinniest guy when I go back to Australia, but that in itself is a problem in Australia. So, they tell you pretty brutally straight, and I guess it helps with the awareness and the motivation to do it. Andrew Yang, not Jerry. Who's Jerry Yang? I work for SNBC. Do I? I don't even know what that means. I thought Andrew Yang was interesting. I have no idea what SMNBC means in that context that you said it, but whatever. Odie Jr., you like running? Am I insane? Yes, I like running. Yes. I am 185 centimeters, Tokyo 503. So, yeah, 80 kilograms and 185 is normally fine. Although, actually, it's pretty good, and I'm happy to be at 80. It's a good weight for me right now. The isolation is not good. Need a mask inside to stop eating. Well, yeah, I guess if you're on your own, I can understand as well, just out of boredom. Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. We could have a 4-day work week in Japan. Kind of other interesting news is that, again, China's started poking. Well, I don't know. You could really call Japan a bear per se, but the long game that I've talked about, where China's been sort of encroaching. South China Sea, they've been a lot more aggressive, but even around Japan, the Senkaku Islands, south of in between Okinawa and Taiwan, they have Taiwan, Japan, and China claim, but Japan has exercised control over since the end of the war. China, how long ago now? Probably 3 years or 4 years ago, they started sending regular Coast Guard patrols around these islands that Japan controls, and also has Coast Guard patrols around. So they started getting kind of close to each other. And China's always been kind of careful to push, but not push things so far that Japan could or America could justify a reaction. However, they've just been incrementally encroaching. And, this is the luxury of not having a democratic system, that you can take your time with this sort of thing. And they've got a huge navy, which they're building up the capability of. So, yeah, there hasn't been a lot of new news about this recently. Just, China's just basically been wearing Japan down on this. But they did decide to basically chase some Japanese fishing boats fishing around these islands the other day. And that forced the Japanese Coast Guard to have to intervene and, cut them off and chase them out of Japanese territorial waters, which, of course, China thinks are not. If anything, these islands are closest to Taiwan. The whole story about the Senkaku Islands in the first place, although, they were sort of, they're closest to Taiwan, and the Americans sort of acknowledged briefly during the occupation when they put it on the Japan side of the line between, at that time, China and Taiwan and Japan. There were some people in America who recognized it was a cartographic error. It had been part of, Japan had exercised sovereignty of it, but sort of as an extension of Taiwan rather than as Okinawa. It's a... that said, Japan has been in control of the Senkaku Islands since the 19th century, and at times have been inhabited, and it's been continuously under control. Japan has been sensitive enough about the issue to not build anything on the islands, and when the Tokyo governor threatened to build a lighthouse down there, because he actually did fundraising to go and buy the land on the islands from a Japanese person who owns the land on those islands. And when the Tokyo governor tried to buy it for Tokyo so that he could basically stick it to China by building a lighthouse, the national government cut him off, and actually has continued to make sure nobody can land on the islands, nobody can build there. So they don't want to aggravate the issue, but they don't want to concede on the sovereignty issue. So Japan is trying to be diplomatic about it, but China is obviously also keen to continue asserting that they think it's theirs, and they're being more aggressive. So again, they've kind of picked a weird timing for that. Graphs on death rates. So again, a lot of criticism as to whether the data from Japan is even reliable, and lots of people debating this online. But certainly, the deaths per million people, Spain, Italy, England, the highest, more than double the rate of America. Germany, but Korea, Japan, China, 5, 4, and 3. Very small, very, very low rates. It's not really clear what this is for. There's been a lot of people online making lots of different theories. One theory that I saw going around that's been pushed by Japanese Weekly is that maybe the disease spread without people realizing late last year. Maybe a benign form of it spread, like in November or December. And maybe Japan already had herd immunity. The other theories about the tuberculosis vaccinations, which all kids in Japan and Korea and China and Australia get, and people don't get in Europe and America, has been another proposed difference. The BBC was talking this week about the obesity being a factor, in survivability. And again, I mean, it's probably just a whole bunch of things. Japanese are just in the habit of wearing masks and, doing things that involve less sort of social contact to begin with. And of course, Japan isn't testing or collecting data as accurately. But that said, I mean, deaths are kind of, are harder to cover up. So just tracking by mortality, it's maybe a more reliable baseline than tracking the number of known cases, because Japan definitely doesn't know anything like what the full extent of cases are. But still interesting numbers, causing interesting discussion. But the point is, it's all speculation, and it's not really very helpful to get into it. I remember I heard somebody, Japanese sites that were speculating it could be taking off shoes culture, and a lot of European people on Twitter got very upset, saying, no, in Europe we all take off shoes, which wasn't how it was when I was in Spain, but, fine. I don't know. If Europeans all take their shoes off and that couldn't possibly be a factor, that's fine. I mean, but certainly, the idea that you could be tramping germs into the house on your shoes is certainly something that would be happening. It would be a risk in New Zealand, would be a risk in, England. So, but the truth is that, again, we always like to have these scientific silver bullet singular explanations for everything, and of course it's not. It's everything all at once. And we don't understand how this virus is transmitted properly. We don't understand, there's confusion about how long it lasts, whether it's even possible to build immunity, whether a vaccine is even possible. We don't know anything. So, it's all speculation. Honestly, it's probably not that helpful to speculate, but it's kind of fun. And the numbers are weird. I mean, like I say, for everything, we've done okay here. We haven't had to have a lockdown like they had in New Zealand and Australia. We haven't made as rapid an improvement as Taiwan or South Korea, because we have a bit as coercive here. But it's good to see that we seem to be having results. Some good news about Korea-Japan relations. Is it possible? Apparently, very quietly, I think it's the only way you can get away with it, the foreign ministries of Japan and South Korea have been coordinating repatriation of nationals in overseas countries. So yeah, whenever either Japan or South Korea has been arranging charter flights to repatriate its citizens from African or Indian or European countries or whatever, they're doubling up. South Korea is flying out Japanese and Japan is flying out South Koreans. Yay! I mean, how hard is that? I still like to talk about the example years ago in Africa when Japan lent an isolated and under fire Korean, UN battalion bullets, and it caused such a fuss in South Korea that they were forced to give the bullets back, and they were out of ammo. Just as an idea of how little, how sensitive the issue of cooperation between Japan and Korea can be, and how stupid that is. I mean, how just being friends for a moment. But again, this is something that's been very discreet, but NHK mentioned it, that this has been quietly going on, and hooray, please, more of this sort of thing. I mean, like I say, so much wasted energy and hate between these two countries, and it's nice to see some cooperation. And I think this is probably the second to last one, that we had 22 cases today. 22 cases, 8 days in a row, less than 100 people. So it looks like Golden Week. It wasn't just a lack of tests during Golden Week, although there certainly were fewer tests during Golden Week. But it looks like there isn't a backlog like we were expecting to see. So good signs. And indeed, Tokyo has seen fewer cases. Now this is the final thing I wanted to talk about, and I couldn't get the story that I wanted to get from Japanese. But so there is one story. I don't know if that is actually the person. Yeah, that's not it. But certainly the main theme that I wanted to actually cover tonight is, so what's been happening in Japan is this has been happening everywhere. I think that there's been these lockdown vigilantes, people reporting their neighbors for violating lockdown rules or whatever. And I suppose when you have police actually finding people and arresting people, when people post on Facebook that they went somewhere and someone in Australia got arrested for that, of course this is happening all over the world. People feeling self-righteous and entitled to troll and whatnot. And in Japan, you can't call the police. There isn't that. But of course, as you know, Japan has this troll, vigilante culture. That people are obsessed. If they find out something outrageous, they'll find the personal information of the person. They'll call up their work. This has happened to many YouTubers in Japan. People do it like it's a game almost. Like, they're trying to prove their skill at basically stalking people and harassing them. And when you add self-righteousness to that, it can get pretty ugly. And there is a case in particular that's been drawing attention this week. That there was a case of a 20-something woman. This is the only information I know, and I haven't cared to look on the internet, although apparently the information is now all out there. There's a woman in Yamanashi Prefecture, one of the adjacent prefectures to Tokyo, inland, and she lived in Tokyo, but apparently the original story is that she had shown some symptoms and been tested, and while she was waiting for her test results, she traveled to see her parents in Yamanashi, and while she was spending the weekend there, she met some friends for a barbecue, and then she went back to Tokyo, where she found out that she had it. So then she had to basically, report that she had it, and they had to do all the contact tracing and figure out all the people that she had contact with. It turned out when they dug into it that she had been a little bit mistruthful. She found out that she was positive before she went home, and when she went home, she, knowing that she had it, she invited friends over for a barbecue. She went to a baseball center, and she knowingly traveled to and from Yamanashi on a bus, on public transportation. And it wasn't until afterwards that all this sort of came out that, and she sort of fibbed about all the things that she had sort of done. So, the original reaction to people finding out, Yamanashi itself announced that this person had been on all these things, and people, be careful if you were catching the bus, or if you were at this baseball center, or if you're having a picnic at this place. Know that there was someone there who was infected. And the internet exploded with rage at this person, basically for being dishonest in the first place was where the self-righteousness came from. However, what immediately happened was hackers found out who this person was, and they found out her name, her address, where she works, and they started a campaign against her. They called up her work, trying to get her fired. They basically started bullying her online, harassing her and her family, and making her life sort of a hell. And it actually prompted the Yamanashi government to first of all come forth and say, please don't bully people who, we need people to feel comfortable sharing information so that they can do contact tracing. So, being self-righteous vigilantes doesn't help. People reacted with extra anger at Yamanashi, telling them to be nice to her. But yeah, this is the thing. There is a really strong cultural thing about, self-righteous sort of bullying. The other thing is that not even self-righteous bullying. The other thing that's really been happening is people who have been, for example, the discrimination against hospital workers. I can't believe that this is only happening in Japan, but certainly in Japan it's more outright. That, for example, daycare is still being theoretically, basically the fear of exposure is causing daycares, schools, and companies to discriminate against the family members of medical workers. One person, there was a case that was being published in the Mainichi, which is a husband who was told that either your wife has to quit her job as a nurse, or you have to quit this job at this company, because you have to come to work, but you're not allowed to come to work while your wife is continuing to treat patients. So actually outright bullying and power harassment of family members against medical workers. In China, when there were cases of physical harassment of medical workers, they actually said that they would be applying the death penalty to those people, and it was I think that was kind of justified. When you're dealing with something like this, yet the idea that people are still more interested in self-preservation than social responsibility in that respect, and again, the sort of the bullying thing is a real thing. But yeah, again, these are not normal cases. These are obviously isolated cases. In Japan, there's 127 million people, so and there are just as many assholes per head of population in Japan as there are in any other country. But of course, the behavior just manifests in different ways. So yeah, and this is the thing, you don't have police enforcing lockdowns, but you do have people who have called up, like when pachinko parlors were named. That doesn't sound like much of a punishment. In fact, some people are complaining that's more like an advertisement to gambling addicts when you publish the names of the pachinko parlors. But the pachinko parlors that stayed open, basically they do come under a lot of pressure. They get a lot of trolls, and they try to attack those people where they live. They find out the managers, they find out the employees, they find out where their families are. They find out, they hit up the business association, the district business associations to get them cut off. They basically, and outside of Tokyo, I mean, Wakayama's, now the government of Wakayama, one of the adjacent prefectures to Osaka, has actually issued stickers for cars for residents of Wakayama that have car number plates or originally from outside of Wakayama, so that their cars don't get scratched and keyed and have rocks thrown at them, and people get bullied for having out of prefecture number plates. It's kind of funny. It's not a lockdown, but in the absence of that, when you leave it basically to the Lord of the Flies kind of social enforcement in Japan, Japan is not a soft touch on this sort of thing. Sometimes maybe it's more justified than others, but again, you should have a justice system to take care of this sort of thing. So yeah, that's kind of how things work here. That is all the topics I have for tonight. It's actually coming exactly up on an hour, so I guess I did pretty well. Tech Art 2, you're getting ready to come to Japan, had bat shots. Maybe the same thing. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry, what are bat shots? You had to get bat shots. These are like, like malaria injections? I had to get those when I went to Singapore. I didn't realize that you had to get shots for coming to Japan. Maybe I got them. I don't remember. Shoes on and off. A lot of places you have to deliver. I know a lot of homes and a lot of places take off shoes, definitely. They said it was for bat bites. In Japan? You have bats here, certainly. Rabies. Were you getting rabies shots? That's crazy. Maybe, but yeah. Andrew Mulboy, sound like a few nuff-nuffs there in Australia. I don't know what a nuff-nuff is, but I assume it's corresponding to what I just talked about, people being nags about it. John Anderson, greetings from London. Good to see you. Welcome to the show. Thank you for leaving a comment in the chat. Always nice to see someone there. Andrea Mulboy, well, we're getting to the end of the show anyway, so thank you for joining as always. Have a good evening. I know it's late where you are. Yes, indeed, Udi Jr. off with their heads. Well, one of the reasons I was late was I was making a track, and it was actually kind of good. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave you with a preview. I'm still working it up, and it's actually, I was going for a, I actually, yes, a few extra men. Well, actually, so Ben Duncan, welcome back to Tokyo Digital Crew. It's nice to get people active again. It's funny how with this thing people are making music. I've been making music again, and it's been fun. Now I can use GarageBand, which can actually let me do a lot more than Korg. I made a really quite decent track. It was a remix of Mata Gaijinka's track, but most of the elements on it were original, so I take quite a lot of satisfaction from it. I posted this week. Check it out. I actually really like the track. There's one part of it with the double bass that I would fix. That it's not quite perfect, but I just wanted to get it out. But the track is really, really good. I'm making another track right now. I kind of set a challenge for myself to try to make sort of music that would be good as sort of like background music on videos, and just sort of like low-key sort of house music as a starting point. I'll get better. If it was up to me, everything would be loud and banging sort of drum and bass, and I do want to do that, but I'm just sort of setting myself a challenge of making like 10 kind of cool, kind of housey sort of tracks. The one that I'm working on right now, it's not all the way there, but it's quite a bit the way there, and I'm quite happy with it. So I'll share that with you as I'll share with you my progress on that as the last part of the show. So we'll make that the outro. So I'll play this. What is the volume like? Let's see how this goes. I think I can see that there. You should be able to hear it. So yes, again, the giant hornets, the murder hornets, they're not, they're here, and they cause problems, but I don't think they're quite worth the hysteria that I see Americans having over them. punk and bass, indeed. It's not a bad idea, Sergeant Bilko. I can't hear this myself right now, so I assume maybe it's hard to hear me. But tell me what you think. Have a good week, everybody. Stay safe, of course. And yeah, have a good one. Like I say, this is still in the under production, but let's see. You can see it there. I'm playing it through the digital audio workstation at the moment. But yeah, have a good week. Remember to like the video if you liked it. Always appreciate that. Stay safe. Have a good week, everybody. And yeah, and Sunny IL. We've got DJ Sunny Side Up. Just joined Tokyo Digital Crew from this week, and he makes heaps of hip hop tracks. So I'm really looking forward to collaborating with him. It's pretty awesome. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yes, John. Well, I'm going to add some more effects and some more transitions. At the moment, there's not really anything in the way of transitions, but it's pretty cool. So anyway, have a good week. I'll do this as the outro, and then I will go. About another minute. It's not that long right now. Hey, Steve from Berkeley, have a good week. And everyone else. And yeah, remember you can follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up with what's going on day to day. Keep up with the latest. Always open to a chat as well. Tokyo 503, good night, stay safe. Glad you enjoyed the show. It's actually, always appreciate that, so thank you. Sergeant Bilko, thank you. Hope people are digging the track. I actually quite like this. I'm always tempted when I make tracks to do more, to add more melodies, to do more sort of stuff, and I really try not to do stuff with this, just make it something that you can just listen to, and it's actually kind of cool. Tikyo Sam, I can't, I won't, and I don't. I'll try, but it's not possible. It's just not possible. I try, but I was just born this way. John Anderson, see you later. That's the end of the track. That's the end of the show. Have a good week, everybody. See you later, Abel. Have a good one. Siblip1, that's probably not how you pronounce it. Stay safe. Have a good one. Oh, it's starting again. Let's stop that. Boom. Have a good week, everybody. Boom. Peace. End stream.